The homeowners association next door moved my fence 12 feet onto my property while I was out of town, and less than 2 weeks later, the entrance to their entire neighborhood vanished. Not damaged, not vandalized, not blocked off with caution tape, gone. Stone sign, decorative lighting, landscaping, everything. The funny thing is, when I first got home, I didn't even know any of that was coming. All I knew was that something felt wrong. You ever pull into your driveway after being away for a few days and immediately notice something you can't explain? That's exactly what happened to me. I turned off the county road and started down the gravel lane leading to my house outside Ashton Ridge, a growing community about 40 minutes from the nearest city. I'd lived there almost 18 years. Same driveway, same view, same fence line. You get so used to your surroundings that even a small change feels strange. At first, I thought maybe the grass had been cut differently. Maybe one of the neighbors had cleared some brush. But as I rolled closer to the house, I realized the space between my driveway and the fence looked tighter than I remembered. Not by inches either, by a lot. I parked the truck, stepped out, and just stood there staring. My old cedar fence was gone. Every post, every rail, every section I'd installed with my brother years earlier. In its place stood a brand new fence made from fresh pressure-treated lumber. The concrete around the posts still looked damp. Whoever built it had finished recently. What really got my attention was where they'd put it. The entire fence line had been moved. Not one section, not a corner. The whole thing, straight across the property line from one end to the other. I walked the length of it in complete disbelief. My original fence panels had been stacked in a pile on my side, like discarded trash. No phone call, no letter, no explanation. Just a small laminated sign zip-tied to one of the new posts. It read, "Boundary adjustment completed according to Community Improvement Plan." Community Improvement Plan. I must have read that sentence 5 times. Then I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. See, the subdivision next to my property, Willow Creek Estates, had a homeowners association. I wasn't part of it. Never had been. My land existed long before their development showed up. Their rules meant absolutely nothing on my property. Yet somehow someone in that neighborhood had convinced themselves they could move a fence and take a 12-foot strip of private land because it looked better on a planning document. Standing there looking at that sign, I wasn't angry yet. I was confused. Confusion came first. Anger showed up a few minutes later. I called my friend Nate, who lived about a mile away and kept an eye on things whenever I traveled. "Did you know about this?" I asked. There was a long pause. "I figured you knew," he said. "They had crews out here 3 days." 3 days? Yeah. I asked one of the workers what they were doing. He said the HOA approved a redesign. I remember rubbing my forehead and looking out at the fence. Approved by who? Nate laughed. Apparently by themselves. That was the moment confusion turned into something else. Because this wasn't a mistake. Mistakes happen when people misunderstand boundaries. Mistakes happen when survey stakes get moved or paperwork gets mixed up. This wasn't that. Someone made a decision. Someone signed off on equipment. Someone hired contractors. Someone spent money. They didn't accidentally move my fence 12 feet onto my property. They chose to. The next morning, I drove straight to the office of Willow Creek Estates. It sat near the front of the subdivision in a brick building designed to look far more important than it actually was. Inside, everything smelled like fresh coffee and expensive air freshener. The receptionist smiled and asked how she could help. I told her I wanted to speak with the HOA president. 15 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man named Grant Holloway. Grant was one of those people who always looked comfortable. Perfect haircut, perfect smile, perfect confidence. The kind of guy who acted like every room belonged to him. He greeted me like we were old friends. "Caleb," he said, leaning back in his chair. "What can I do for you?" I looked him directly in the eye. "Why is my fence 12 feet inside my property?" His smile barely changed. That. Just hearing those words irritated me. That. Like we were discussing a landscaping choice. "The adjustment improves the entrance corridor," he said. "Improves it." I repeated. "The visual approach to the community is much cleaner now. Better symmetry, better traffic flow." I stared at him for several seconds. Then I said, "Grant, that's my land." He folded his hands together. Our planning committee reviewed everything carefully. You reviewed my property? We reviewed the area. Without asking me. For the first time, a tiny crack appeared in the smile. Not much, just enough to notice. Then he said something that changed the entire direction of the story. Honestly, Caleb, it's only 12 feet. Only 12 feet. I can still hear those words. Because right then I realized Grant had forgotten something very important. Years earlier, before most of Willow Creek was even built, the developers had come to me asking for a favor. They wanted part of their decorative entrance near the roadway to extend onto a corner of my land. Not much. A small section, a stone monument sign, some landscaping, and a few lights. They promised it would help property values and improve the appearance of the area. I wasn't using that corner anyway, so I agreed. No contract, no lease, no payment, just a handshake. Back then, I figured neighbors should help neighbors. Sitting across from Grant, I suddenly understood something he clearly didn't. Their beautiful entrance existed only because I'd allowed it. And if they could ignore my property rights, maybe it was time I stopped being so generous. I left Grant's office without raising my voice, without threatening anybody, and without giving him the reaction he was probably expecting. The truth is, people like Grant usually know how to deal with angry people. They know how to stall them, calm them down, redirect them into endless meetings and committees until they get tired and go away. What they don't always know how to handle is someone who quietly walks out the door and starts gathering facts. On the drive home, I kept replaying that conversation in my head. It's only 12 feet. The more I thought about it, the worse it sounded. Not because of the distance itself, but because of what it revealed. If somebody can take 12 feet today, what's stopping them from taking 20 tomorrow? Property lines only matter when everyone agrees they matter. The moment people start deciding they're optional, everything falls apart. The next morning, I drove to the county records office. If you've never spent time in one of those places, they're not exactly exciting. Beige walls, old maps, filing cabinets that seem older than some of the employees. But buried inside those records is something powerful, the truth. A survey technician named Linda helped me pull the original plats, easements, and property records. She spent almost an hour going through everything with me. Finally, she spread a large survey map across the desk and pointed directly at the boundary line. There it is, she said. Same line it's always been. No deviations. I asked. None. No adjustments. Not a single one. Then she looked at me over her glasses. Why? I laughed. Because apparently my neighbor's HOA thinks they own it. She smiled the way people smile when they've heard something ridiculous before. By noon, I had copies of everything I needed. Surveys, deeds, historical records. Every document confirmed exactly what I already suspected. The fence had been moved illegally. More importantly, the corner section containing Willow Creek's entrance monument was unquestionably located on my property. That afternoon, I met with an attorney named Marcus Reed. Marcus had handled property disputes for decades and had the personality of a man who enjoyed watching arrogant people lose arguments. After reviewing the paperwork, he leaned back in his chair and asked one simple question. Do you want compensation or compliance? What's the difference? I asked. Compensation means negotiating. Compliance means enforcing. I thought about Grant's smile. I thought about my fence piled on the ground like garbage. Then I said compliance. Marcus nodded slowly. Good choice. Within hours, formal notices were prepared. The first demanded immediate recognition of the true boundary line. The second revoked permission for any structures, improvements, landscaping, signs, utilities, or decorative features occupying my property. The third established a deadline for removal. Everything was legal. Everything was documented. Everything was enforceable. 3 days later, Grant called me. Caleb, surely we can discuss this. We're discussing it right now. Removing the entrance would be disruptive. Moving my fence was disruptive. There's no reason to escalate. You already escalated. Silence. Then he tried a different approach. The community invested heavily in that entrance. You should have thought about that before you crossed the property line. He hung up shortly afterward. The following week was surprisingly quiet. Too quiet. I could almost feel the HOA board convincing themselves I wouldn't follow through. Maybe they assumed I'd cool off. Maybe they believed legal letters were just negotiating tactics. Maybe they genuinely thought they could outlast me. What they didn't realize was that the process had already begun. Early Monday morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and walked outside just as the first trucks arrived. One pickup, then another, then a flatbed trailer, then excavation equipment. The contractor stepped out and handed me paperwork confirming authorization. I signed. He nodded. We'll start with the stonework. I looked toward the entrance. Go ahead. By 9 o'clock, workers were removing decorative lighting. By 10, sections of landscaping disappeared. Around lunchtime, the first stone from the monument sign came down. That's when residents started noticing. Cars slowed. People stopped. Phones appeared. By mid-afternoon, a crowd had gathered near the entrance. Some looked confused. Others looked furious. One woman marched directly toward the crew, demanding answers. The foreman simply handed her a copy of the legal authorization and returned to work. Watching that giant stone sign come apart piece by piece was strangely surreal. For years, it had been the symbol of Willow Creek Estates. It appeared on brochures, advertisements, newsletters, and social media posts. People took family photos beside it. New homeowners posed in front of it after closing on their houses. Yet by sunset, it was nothing more than stacked stone on trailer. The lights were gone. The landscaping was gone. The decorative walls were gone. The monument sign was gone. All that remained was an ordinary road leading into an ordinary neighborhood. The next few days revealed something fascinating. It turned out the entrance wasn't just decorative. It created a psychological boundary. Without it, the entire feel of the neighborhood changed. Delivery drivers started using the streets as shortcuts. GPS systems routed additional traffic through the area. Visitors entered without realizing they'd crossed into a private residential community. People who once felt like they lived behind an elegant gateway suddenly felt exposed. Complaints exploded. HOA meetings became standing room-only events. Residents demanded explanations. Some blamed the board. Others blamed me. A few blamed both. One evening, Nate called laughing so hard he could barely speak. You should have seen the meeting tonight. That bad. Worse. One guy stood up and asked why the board thought stealing land was a landscaping strategy. I nearly spit out my drink. You're kidding. Not even a little. Then his voice became serious. People are mad, Caleb. Really mad. The pressure inside Willow Creek kept building. Security complaints increased. Arguments broke out online. Rumors spread. Every day seemed to create a new problem. Then, about 2 weeks after the entrance disappeared, Grant showed up at my house. This time he wasn't smiling. Not even close. He stood on my porch looking exhausted. His suit jacket was wrinkled. Dark circles sat under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept much lately. Can we talk? He asked. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Sure. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Finally, he looked toward the road where the entrance used to stand. You've made your point. Have I? The neighborhood is suffering. I folded my arms. Interesting choice of words. His jaw tightened. This isn't helping anyone. Neither did moving my fence. That was a mistake. I laughed. No, Grant. A mistake is backing into someone's mailbox. What happened was a decision. His expression hardened. You can't keep doing this. That line almost made me smile because it reminded me of something from an old movie. I reached into a folder I'd brought outside and handed him copies of the county surveys, legal notices, and ownership records. Then I looked him straight in the eye. Grant, I said calmly, I already did. For the first time since this whole mess started, he had no response. None. Because facts are stubborn things. You can argue opinions. You could debate intentions. But ownership records don't care about feelings. They simply exist. He stood there silently for several seconds before taking the documents. Then he turned and walked back to his car. Watching him leave, I had a feeling the real negotiation was finally about to begin. What I didn't realize was just how far the HOA would have to fall before they were ready to treat me with the respect they should have shown from the beginning. The next week was the quietest week of the entire dispute, and somehow that made it the most interesting. Nobody from the HOA called. Nobody showed up at my door. No angry emails appeared in my inbox. The silence felt different this time. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't stubbornness. It felt like people finally realizing they were out of moves. Meanwhile, life in Willow Creek kept getting more complicated. Residents were demanding answers from a board. Homeowners who had never paid attention to HOA politics suddenly started attending meetings. Questions that should have been asked years earlier were being asked now. Who approved the fence relocation? Who authorized the contractors? Who verified the property lines? Who signed the paperwork? From what Nate told me, those meetings became brutal. One board member resigned. Another stopped showing up altogether. The neighborhood Facebook group turned into a battlefield. Everybody wanted someone to blame. The funny thing is, I wasn't celebrating any of it. I know that probably sounds strange. A lot of people hear stories like this and imagine some grand revenge fantasy where the hero sits back enjoying every second of the chaos. That wasn't me. Most of the residents hadn't done anything wrong. They bought homes, paid their dues, trusted their board, and assumed the people in charge were acting responsibly. If anything, they were victims too. The real issue had never been the neighborhood. It had been arrogance. It had been a handful of people convincing themselves that ownership only mattered when it benefited them. About 10 days after Grant's visit, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Then another. Out stepped Grant, 2 attorneys, and 3 HOA board members. That alone told me everything I needed to know. The first time I'd walked into their office, they'd treated me like an inconvenience. Now, they were coming to my house with lawyers. Funny how quickly respect appears when reality gets expensive. We sat down at a table on my back porch. Nobody bothered with small talk. One of the attorneys opened a folder and slid a packet toward me. We'd like to discuss a long-term resolution. I looked at Grant. He wouldn't meet my eyes. So I opened the packet. This wasn't another attempt to push me around. This was a surrender wrapped in legal language. The HOA formally acknowledged the correct property boundaries. They agreed to rebuild my fence exactly where it belonged. They agreed to cover every construction expense. They agreed to maintain insurance obligations regarding the portion of the entrance near my property. Most importantly, they requested a permanent recorded agreement allowing a limited section of the neighborhood entrance to remain on my land under clearly defined conditions. Everything would be documented. Everything would be enforceable. Everything would be transparent. I spent nearly an hour reviewing the proposal. Then I closed the folder. What about compensation? One attorney asked. It's included, I said. Monthly access payments. He nodded. Correct. Grant finally spoke. We're trying to make this right. I looked at him for a long moment. You know what the crazy part is? He frowned. What's that? If you'd knocked on my door before moving the fence, we probably could have solved this in 15 minutes. Nobody had an answer for that because everybody at the table knew it was true. This entire disaster had started because somebody valued control more than communication. A few days later, we finalized everything. Surveyors returned to the property. New markers were installed. Crews removed the illegally placed fence and rebuilt it exactly along the true boundary line. Watching those posts go back where they belonged felt oddly satisfying. Not because I won, but because reality had finally been restored. Facts were back where facts belonged. The entrance project started shortly afterward. This time it looked very different. Smaller, simpler, less dramatic. The giant monument sign never returned. The oversized landscaping never returned. The unnecessary grandeur disappeared. In its place stood a modest entrance that fit the neighborhood without pretending to be something it wasn't. And sitting inside a county records office was a legally binding agreement, making it crystal clear why that entrance existed. Not because the HOA owned the land. Not because they took it. Not because they demanded it. Because permission had been granted. That distinction mattered. A few months later, I ran into Grant at a local diner. It was the first time we'd seen each other since signing the agreement. He looked different, less polished, more human. We ended up talking for almost 20 minutes. At one point, he shook his head and laughed. You know, people still bring this up. I imagine they do. Some think you went too far. I took a sip of coffee. Maybe. He smiled slightly. Others think we deserved it. Maybe that too. For the first time ever, we actually had an honest conversation. No power games. No posturing. No kemitis. Just two people talking. Before leaving, He said something I didn't expect. For what it's worth, I should have stopped it when I had the chance. I nodded. Yeah, you should have. Then he extended his hand. This time, unlike years earlier, I made sure everything important was already in writing before I shook it. Looking back now, the fence was never really about 12 feet of land. It was about a question that communities all over the country struggle with. Where does convenience end and ownership begin? How much authority should organizations have over people who never agreed to join them? And perhaps most importantly, what happens when people become so focused on appearances that they forget the principles underneath them? The neighborhood got its entrance back. I got my property back. Life moved on. But every now and then, when I drive past that road, I still think about how close all of it came to being avoided. One conversation, one phone call, 1 ounce of respect. That's all it would have taken. Instead, somebody decided 12 feet didn't matter. In the end, that decision cost them far more than 12 feet ever could. And here's the part one still wonder about. If you had been in my position, would you have stopped after getting the fence restored, or would you have done exactly what I did and forced the issue all the way to the end? Was it justice, or was it revenge disguised as principle? Let me know in the comments, because even now, years later, people can't seem to agree. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experiences with difficult neighbors, HOAs, or property disputes. Some of the best stories come from real people dealing with situations that should never have happened in the first place. And trust me, this wasn't the last time I learned how expensive disrespect can become.